Hi, everybody. Radical Gardener. Oh, here's Steve. Steve wants to say hi. Hi, Stevie. You want to say hi? Look how big he's gotten. Remember Steve when he was a baby? Oh, just say hello. Say hello, crazy cat. Him and Larry are great friends. Anyway, okay. So I've been reading this book. Well, you know me, I'm always reading. But it's called The Lost Continent of Mu, which is about Lemuria, and the motherland of men. But what's so interesting about this book is that it was written in 1928. So he did a lot of his research in the early 20s, you know, before we got really woo-woo. And it's fascinating, just fascinating book. So it has to do with the catastrophe, is 12,000 years ago. And what happened to those people that were on Atlantis or Lemuria, which was before Atlantis? Where did they go? And then he just kind of tracks how through the symbology they just ended up everywhere, and you can see that from these old symbols and the old really symbols that tell the story of Lemuria. It's really interesting. But at the end of this book, he talks about, he's presenting his case of a vitalistic world as opposed to a mechanistic world. Hold on. Meaning a world with soul, a world that's just based in nothing but science. And he's saying, like a lot of the people that I read, you know, Rupert Sheldrake or Rudolf Steiner, they all talk about that it's both, and it's when we bring the two together that we're going to get some real answers, or at least be able to ask some really big and intelligent questions. So I'm going to start here. He says, how long ago was it that man first appeared on Earth? I cannot state the number of years. No one can. Man today has no more conception of how many years ago that mankind commenced, or the length in years of any geological time, era, or period than the ancient fossil on my library table. Under the great law of creation, there must first come a condition, and with it a suitable life to live in it. A condition has always been subject to the workings of the earth's primary force. Throughout the history of the earth, this has been so, and at no time do we find the new creation behind the condition, because the condition is the parent of the creation or development. So you have to have a scenario for something to be created in. You have to have an environment. You have to have something. You have to have stuff for creation to take place. When was the condition for man's appearance on earth perfected? The condition for the welfare of man was far advanced at the end of, and I don't know if I'm going to say this right, Oligocene, or Oligocene, or is it Oligocene? I don't know. And was well advanced, if not absolutely perfected, during the latter half or the beginning of the Pliocene. This was long before the great gas belts were formed, long before the mountains were raised, and long before the geological glacial period. I have placed before my readers such reasonable proofs that it is clearly shown that, first, at one time in the Earth's history, there was a great continent of land in the Pacific Ocean, where now we find only water and groups of small islands. Second, this land in ancient times had two names, a geographical and a hierarchical. The hierarchical name was Mu, the geographical, the lands of the West. Third, in this land, man made his advent on earth. Man was a special creation and not of nature's making. He came fully developed in form, but required education and mental development. Now, what is man? The late James D. Dana says, or it might be Dana, man is not of nature's making. He is a special act of the infinite being whose image he bears. I cordially agree with Dana, but by an irresistible force, I am compelled to go further. All endeavors to determine when man first appeared on earth must be futile. It has always been a veiled secret and always must remain so. Because man's first home on earth with this secret now forms the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. We can, however, hope through geological and archaeological research someday to be able to get to a point that is near the date of his first appearance on earth. Many scientists have declared the belief to be that they are descended from some forest beast, some monkey of prehistoric origin. Their contention must therefore be that man, having descended from a monkey, is a monkey still in a developed state. I have shown that man was on earth and in a high state of civilization during the later part of the Tertiary era from the quality and perfection of his works. It is shown that he must have been in existence an immensely long time before the end of that era. This would certainly carry him back contemporary with the first apes who resembled men, so we lived alongside them. If evolution were possible, which the old Nakal tablets show it is not, the reverse would have occurred. That is, monkeys would have come out of man, and I am not at all certain that some men are not making monkeys out of themselves today. This tendency of some men is very strongly pointed out in the Maya, Hindu, and Egyptian writings, so that it is nothing new. Man, the most complex of all forms of life and the most perfect form of life, was created for a special purpose, as pointed out in the Nakal tablets. And it may be Nakal. Man is an animal of the order of mammals, distinct and different from all other animals due to the fact that he is associated with his body a force or soul for the purpose of ruling the earth. This great gift has been bestowed on no other form of life, which proves conclusively that man is a separate and distinct creation possessing a divine force. It is possible that he can have come out of or evolved from some animal not having that force. It is impossible, right? Man with this force has been given the power, when he learns how to use his force, to place himself next to the infinite being, a part of which he has within himself. Man is therefore a son of God. Like all other creatures, man was started at the foot of the ladder, but unlike all other creatures, he was given the power to rise. Man has always been surrounded by influences striving against each other for good and for evil. Man's actions are governed by these influences. For easy explanation, I will call them affinities. The soul's affinities can only suggest that which is good. Evil suggestions come from the material affinities or elementary parts. Material suggestions are not all evil, only some. The material affinities can suggest evil, the soul's affinities cannot. The soul and its affinities suggest to the mind. The material affinities also suggest to the mind. The mind determines for the body which suggestions shall be followed. Conscience is the mouthpiece of the soul to the mind. Conscience is the mouthpiece of the soul to the mind. Bodily actions and words from the mouth are the indications of the powers or influences that are controlling the mind. The material interest or affinities may control the mind of man for a time, but before the earth can end her existence, man's soul must reign supreme over his mind and body. At the commencement of man's existence, the material affinities were very powerful owing to the lack of experience, so that advancement was necessarily slow. Time went on, one generation followed another, and man began to rise step by step towards his preordained goal, the ascendancy of the soul's affinities over the material affinities. The time must come when all of men's actions and thoughts will be governed solely by the dictation of the soul. I think we're headed for that, for sure. This was the task given to the soul to perform when it was placed within man's body at his creation to govern this earth. By the advancement of man, as indicated by science and learning, he is now only approaching the threshold of knowledge. When knowledge is complete, which can only be when man understands and can control certain earthly forces, which will enable him to understand his own greater force, then the works of man will be beyond our present comprehension. So in other words, once we really understand what we are truly capable of, we have been so disempowered through religion, through the Bible, through everything that keeps giving our power away of who and what we are. And we are an extension of the divine. And so it's just a matter, and we talked about this in an interview we did with Nick. I call him Nick Veneman, but it's not how you say his last name. Nick V. Vinmanian, I think that's how you say it. But anyways, what a lovely man. It was my point. What was my point with this? Oh, talking about how we create our reality, that's really what we're here to do, is to be in this inward journey and creating greatness, not only for ourselves, but for everything around us. So it's just about living in the moment, which eradicates fear, and just dream of all things possible that are for you and for everyone around you and for this planet. And by doing that, you operate at a very high frequency. And because you do, people around you, their frequency lifts and rises and changes. And I've watched it in action for the last 4 or 5 months. It's been pretty cool. A lot of kindness out there. And, we're watching a lot of people through fear do things that maybe some of us wouldn't agree with, when we're talking like vaccines and things like that. And I had a friend, she said it really well. She says, the people that are choosing to do that, their higher self is sacrificing their life in the here and now so that this lesson can be learned. When we're done going through this madness, we'll never have to do this again. I'm telling you, we'll never have to do it again. So make the most of it. Stay positive, keep researching, and keep that frequency high, So, whatever you choose to do, man, it's up to you. Really, it is. I just think you're going to get really sick. So be careful. That's all. You can disagree. I get it. By the advancement of man, as indicated by science and learning, he is now only approaching the threshold of knowledge. When knowledge is complete, which can only be when man understands and can control certain earthly forces, which will enable him to understand his own greater force, then the works of man will be beyond our present comprehension. With his soul force thoroughly understood by himself, man will be incapable of evil thoughts or actions. That's what I've been saying that. Man will then be able to accomplish anything that may be dictated by his soul. That's right. Right. You create your reality out of this pure frequency that you'll be operating at. Because the soul will have no influences working against it. Get it? Yeah. You have no opposition. Then the works of man will be good because his soul will be incapable of evil. We have as yet been looking only at man's past. Let us for a brief moment look into his future and see what destiny holds in store for him. All things point to a time when man will have perfect control over all of the earth's elements and many of her forces, a state to which he is now advancing. Now, he wrote this in the early 20s. The power of his soul force is only now beginning to dawn on present man. There are many strange phenomena, or apparently so, where objective points are reached through working the soul force. And yet, the one accomplishing them is not aware that he is doing so by the aid of a force. He discovers he has a power, but does not know what that power is. He only knows the results. In some way, he has been advanced far enough to work his soul force in a limited direction, yet does not understand it. The great mysteries of the Hindus, Polynesians, Egyptians, and biblical miracles are and were the result of working the soul force. And Native Americans, both the Hindu and Polynesian knowledge are peculiar. They appear to be somewhat proficient along certain lines, but extremely inefficient in others. It would seem they have no conception that the force they are using can be used in any other direction except along certain lines. So it's just not fully realized. Christ was the perfect example of the soul force being in perfect control over the mind and body. He appeared on earth as others did before him in fulfillment of the great divine law. Man's mind had arrived at the condition. Christ was placed on earth as an example for man to teach and to show what man eventually must become and can do. Stop waiting for others. It's up to us. So, the development is now going on. Man must become perfect, otherwise the great divine law will have miscarried. As the law is divine, it cannot miscarry. As the law is divine, it cannot miscarry. It is regrettable, yet a notable fact, that many of our greatest scientists become atheists and have been, as a rule, advocates of the theory of evolution, and the fact remains that a true evolutionist cannot be anything but an atheist. It is yet more regrettable that they become atheists when they were struggling in the opposite direction, for science, fully understood, cannot but impress the student with the power and mystery of the great supreme, the deity. Yeah, how do you do that? How do you leave that part out? Okay. Science is the twin sister of religion. That's an interesting statement. Science properly studied cannot help making man a better being, for it teaches him that he himself is a higher and a grander creation than he has ever before appreciated. It gives a determination to his soul force to gain its preordained ascendancy over the mind and the body's material affinities. It teaches him that within his house of clay, there is an everlasting life. At every step, the hand of God is revealed. And above all, it teaches him that by following the suggestions of his soul, everlasting glory and happiness await him. The rock on which many scientists have wrecked their ships is materialism. In their studies, they have eliminated forces and their workings, saying a force is the result of atomic movements. True, all forces are, except the force which first starts atomic movements. So what's first? This is the force the atheist has never found. Consequently, he built his structure without considering it. He found only the minor forces originating from atomic movements. He never came in direct touch with God. The movements of atoms are cogwheels in a piece of machinery. One turns the one it is meshed into. This one in turn turns others, and so on, and so on and on. But what turned the first wheel? Not any other wheel, because it was the first. Therefore, there must be something at the back of it. What is it? A force independent of all atoms. The universe is a set of atomic cogwheels. What turns the first wheel in the universe? A force, the great primary force, the great infinite force, God. The atheist has never discovered that God is the great primary force, working all things through subsidiary forces, and that the atomic forces are only subsidiary forces to the supreme force. So, okay, on your atomic forces, but we got one better. It's the supreme force. Thus, the atheist has only studied the material side. His deductions would therefore naturally be elements govern forces, because without the elements, the forces could not exist. This being so, forces are cast aside as being immaterial and are virtually obliterated from consideration. The rudder is taken from his ship, and she is cast on the rocks. Throughout all of the deductions and conceptions of the atheist, his mind has been governed absolutely by his material affinities. His material affinities have persuaded his mind that they are all powerful. Nothing now remains in the mind of the atheist except that he is a mere chemical compound of elements, no soul, no God, chaos. Had the atheist given his careful study to forces as he did to elements, constantly working back and back, following one force back to another, he would have eventually come to the origin of movement. It would then have been disclosed to him that he himself contained a force other than the physical, and that force was a living soul. With this knowledge, he would realize what he is, not the poor brute beast he is trying to make himself out to be, but one who has within himself an actual part of the Supreme and is therefore a son of God, just as the leaf of a tree is a part of the tree itself. Both Christ and Gautama declared they were only what other men might become. By his chemical knowledge of elements, the scientist appreciates that the chemical elementary compound of his body must eventually decompose, and that this decomposition must release the soul. As he knows the ultimate finality of his elements, he knows that the soul, like the elements, cannot die. All must continue on forever, for elements decompose, pass on into other forms. It is preordained that all chemical elementary compounds must eventually decompose, separate, return to original form, and go back whence they came. The elements having released the soul from its bondage. I love that. The elements having released the soul from its bondage. The soul, being governed by the same divine law as the elements, must also return whence it came. Coming from the great source, the glorious, triumphant end of man's soul must be its return to God. Isn't that good? Yeah, so there you go. It's a mechanistic and a vitalistic world, so let's just get those two things hooked up, right? So the garden. Okay. Planted 350 starts, like little plants like this big, to encourage ground cover in my garden. So excuse me, that better work, because that was insane. That's a lot of work. And it wasn't cheap. So that, I will be done planting tomorrow. This will be really my third planting since I've been here. I've had something growing nonstop since I moved to Florida, which was a year ago, right? A year ago, January. So I have kale that I planted like 8 months ago that still looks great. It's from Baker Creek. It is great kale. I mean, I was looking at it today. It just looks terrific. So planted some more flowering tropical plants. The flowers are just really coming to, especially like the passion fruit plant and the passion vine. And I planted some flowering bushes, though they're really, really small. I've been ordering plants online because it's just cheaper, It's expensive, man. Everything about landscaping is just expensive. And also planted some really cool tall grasses and kind of a bushy, grassy tree. I just planted that last week. That looks really good. It was where Larry was digging in the dirt, so we're trying to discourage Larry from there. He's doing great dog. I need to get the link from Nick V to download the video that Gretchen and I did with him. He did a great job. He's such a kind person. I mean, what's not to like about that guy? So he's associated with Charlie Ward, if you don't know who I'm talking about. And just a really sweet man, just sweet man. So, we're just reaching out and asking people if they're interested in talking to us about our work. We just feel it's time for it to get out there and it's needed. And, the great thing about it is my music is free. So anybody that wants it or feels that they need it, we're more than willing just to give it to them. So, yeah, that's it. It's great to see everybody. I'm doing well. See you tomorrow. I'm going to show off the garden, radical gardener, from my garden to yours. May your garden always grow. I'm going to send you a ton of love. Okay, goodbye.